A Dozen Things to Remember at the Carnival by LukkynUmber. Welcome to the carnival! Just a few things I'd like to go over with you all before you get started enjoying the attractions. When in the maze of mirrors, remember, they can't get out of the mirror as long as you are watching them. Our haunted house is currently malfunctioning. We apologize. If you're invited in by a smiling man in a top hat, don't enter. When using the restrooms after dark, you must use the buddy system. If you should lose your buddy, we insist you take a new one. Enjoy the Ferris wheel. It's the tallest one in the state. But when your car is at the top of the wheel, only look down or close your eyes. Several months ago, a pair of occupants reportedly looked out over the fence that borders the park and didn't like what they saw. They jumped. Madame Maliakna is a new attraction here. She'll read your palm if you're nice. But if you, well, just to make sure you're nice to her. Make sure you visit our zombie shooting gallery, where you can win various prizes. Don't go crazy on the ammo, though. We can't let inventory get too low, just in case. You'll notice multiple cans grouped together near all trash receptacles. Please be advised, the green can is for plastics, the brown is for general waste, the black is for glass, and the white cans should remain sealed at all times. The leprechaun who can guess your weight is a real hoot. However, if he asks your kids to join him in the photo tent, make sure and decline his invitation. The merry-go-round is an old classic. The children always love it. Just remember, they can't stay on the ride forever, no matter how attached they get. I know you all want the best seats for Mr. Mysterioso's magic act, but just a heads up, do not arrive more than 15 minutes before a show starts, unless you're volunteering for cleanup duty. Here at the carnival, we currently have no clowns on staff. With that in mind, we aren't responsible if some turn up in your family photos. Please take advantage of the bottled water for sale throughout the park. Our drinking fountains aren't advisable to use, as there's a small possibility that the water from the neighboring water park has been leaching through to our wells. Have a super duper day and bring your friends next time. Bus 330 by TheQueen November 14th, 1995, Beijing. It was near midnight and the weather was unusually cold. The last bus of the day was slowly moving across the outskirts of the town. Since it was the last bus, only few people were on it. As the bus turned a corner, the driver saw two men waving under a lone streetlight. Oddly enough, the driver was not expecting any more passengers in this middle of nowhere. Nevertheless, he let them on. In fact, it was 3 people. 2 were wearing traditional Chinese robes that had long gone out of fashion, and they were carrying a man with absurdly long and messy hair, with his face looking down. The 3 sat at the back of the bus, and the passengers were frightened. But the bus driver tried to calm the passengers by saying that they were probably movie actors that drank too much and forgot to change. And everyone took his word. Everyone except an old lady, who constantly looked back at the 3 men with suspicion and fears in her eyes. As the bus approached the next stop, the old lady suddenly stood up, frantically started to accusing the young man behind her for stealing her wallet. The young man was confused, and everyone tried to calm the situation. But the old lady was stubborn and forcefully drags the young man down the bus, claiming she's taking him to the police station not far from here. After they got out of the bus, the young man, furious he'd missed the last bus of the day, was about to throw a fit with the old lady. But then he sees the expression of the old lady suddenly turn to calm and relieved. "Young man, I just saved your life. Those 3 men back there, they aren't human. When I looked at them, a wind from the window blew over their robes, and they didn't have any legs at all." The next day, the bus company reported that bus 330 never returned. 4 days later, the bus was found hundreds of kilometers from Beijing, with 4 severely decayed bodies inside. How the bus got there, and how the bodies were so severely decayed in such short amount of time, no one knows. Proud Mary by Shuck. Everywhere I go today, I can't escape the song Proud Mary by Creedence Clearwater Revival. I shouldn't complain, as it's always been my favorite song. My earliest memory is of the time I clambered up on stage at my aunt's wedding and sang a semi-accurate version into a microphone, whilst everyone clapped along. My mom even named me Mary after the song, so I guess it was my destiny. I keep running into my mom today, too. I had a free day, and I spent it wandering around my local shopping center, which is pretty typical, with a cinema, bowling alley, and the usual chain restaurants. I heard the song in the cinema foyer when I passed. It was being used in the trailer for some dumb biopic. My mom was sitting in a generic coffee place opposite, on her own, smiling but looking anxious. And through the open door, from a radio behind the counter, I could just make out Proud Mary playing softly. I thought back to when I finished runner-up in my high school talent contest, singing a Tina Turner-esque version of the song, my one moment of almost glory. Whenever I went into a bar, I headed straight for the jukebox. My friends got pretty sick of it, not me. I didn't go for coffee. I just kept walking, following my feet and reminiscing. Every major incident over my life seemed linked to that song. The cover versions are good, since it's one of those songs you can't really screw up, but the CCR original reigns supreme. I saw my mom again, looking a little stressed, sat alone inside a crummy restaurant, gazing back at me through the huge window. The doors were propped wide open, and guess what song was playing through the sound system inside? You know, it's funny. I used to joke to my mom that if I was ever in some horrific car accident and ended up in a coma, she should play that song for me at full volume. If that won't wake me up, she might as well switch off the life support. I walked on, rolling, rolling, rolling on the river. My boyfriend always hated the song, which I should have taken as a bad omen. He preferred speed metal as he raced around in his souped-up Audi. The shops began to close for the day, and I left the building and headed off down the street to nowhere in particular. A bus was waiting for me at the stop. Its door open. Proud Mary was tinnily emanating from somewhere on board. My mom was the only passenger. She looked weary, resigned, and suddenly very old. But I carried on my way, and soon heard the bus doors close as it drove off. I'm not tired, though it's been a long day. I think I should head home, as it must be getting very late. There's no one else around, and the sky is growing suddenly very dark. Mother Huldra. A small note. Huldra, or Huldra, or Hole, was the Germanic goddess of most things. She was the chief goddess, married to Odin, led the great hunt, and after Christianity was downgraded, but still existed, as in this story. It was said when it snowed that Mother Huldra was making her bed. She was also the deliverer of gifts in places like Switzerland. However, this is the one that is left to us by the Brothers Grimm. A widow had 2 daughters. One was pretty and industrious. The other was ugly and lazy. And as the ugly one was to her own daughter, she loved her much the best, and the pretty one was made to do all the work and be the drudge of the house. Every day the poor girl had to sit by a well on the high road and spin until her fingers bled. Now it happened once that as the spindle was bloody, she dipped it into the well to wash it, but it slipped out of her hand and fell in. Then she began to cry and ran to her stepmother and told her of her misfortune, and her stepmother scolded her without mercy and said in her rage, "As you let the spindle fall in, you must go and fetch it out again." Then the girl went back again to the well, not knowing what to do, and in despair of her heart, she jumped down into the well, the same way the spindle had gone. After that, she knew nothing, and when she came to herself, she was in a beautiful meadow, and the sun was shining on the flowers that grew round her, and she walked on through the meadow until she came to a baker's oven that was full of bread, and the bread called out to her, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I am baked enough already." Then she drew near, and with the baker's peel she took out all of the loaves, one after another. And she went farther on until she came to a tree weighed down with apples. And it called out to her, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all of us ripe." Then she shook the tree until the apples fell like rain. And she shook until there was no more to fall. And when she had gathered them together in a heap, she went on farther. At last she came to a little house, and the woman was peeping out of it. She had such great teeth that the girl was terrified, and about to run away, only the old woman called her back. "What are you afraid of, my dear child? Come and live with me, and if you do the housework well and orderly, things shall go well with you. You must take great pains to make my bed well, and shake it up thoroughly, so that the feathers fly about. And then in the world it snows, for I am Mother Huldra." As the old woman spoke so kindly, the girl took courage, consented, and went to her work. She did everything to the old woman's satisfaction, and shook the bed with such a will that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. And so she led a good life
and never a cross word, but boiled and roasted meat every day. When she had lived a long time with Mother Hulda, she began to feel sad, not knowing herself what ailed her. At last she began to think she must be homesick, and although she was 1,000 times better off at the home where she was, yet she had a great longing to go home. At last she said to her mistress, "I am homesick, and although I am very well off here, I cannot stay any longer. I must go back to my own home." Mother Hulda answered, "It pleases me well you should wish to go home, and as you have served me faithfully, I will undertake to send you there." She took her by the hand and led her to a large door standing open, and as she was passing through it, there fell upon her a heavy shower of gold, and the gold hung all about her so that she was covered with it. "All this is yours because you have been so industrious," said Mother Hulda. And besides that, she returned to her spindle, the very same that she had dropped in the well. And then the door was shut again, and the girl found herself back again in the world, not far from her mother's house. And as she passed through the yard, the cock stood on top of the well and cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, our golden girl has come home too." Then she went to her mother, and as she has returned covered in gold, she was well received. So the girl related all her history and what had happened to her, and when the mother heard how she had come to have such great riches, she began to wish that her ugly and idle daughter might have the same good fortune. So she sent her to sit by the well and spin, and in order to make her spindle bloody, she put her hand into a thorn hedge. Then she drew the spindle into the well. Then she threw the spindle into the well and jumped in herself. She found herself, like her sister, in a beautiful meadow and followed the same path. And when she came to the baker's oven, the bread cried out, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I am quite done already." But the lazy bone answered, "I have no desire to black my hands," and went further on. Soon she came to the apple tree, who called out, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all of us ripe." But the lazy bones answered, "That's all fine. Suppose one of you should fall on my head," and went on farther. When she came to Mother Hulda's house, she did not feel afraid, as she knew beforehand of her great teeth, and entered into her service at once. The first day she put her hand well into the work, and was industrious, and did everything Mother Hulda bade her, because of the gold she expected. But the second day she began to be idle, and the third day still more so that she would not get up in the morning. Neither did she make Mother Hulda's bed as it ought to have been made, and did not shake it for the feathers to fly about, so that Mother Hulda soon grew tired of her and gave her warning, at which the lazy thing was well pleased, and thought that now the shower of gold was coming. So Mother Hulda led her to the door, and as she stood in the doorway, instead of a shower of gold, a great kettle full of pitch was emptied over her. "That is the reward for your service," said Mother Hulda, and shut the door. So the lazy girl came home, all covered with pitch, and the cock on top of the well, seeing her, cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, our dirty girl has come home too." And the pitch remained sticking to her fast, and never, as long as she lived, could it be gotten off. This is a true story that took place in Sweden in November of 1741. This comes from the public court records. When Queen Ulrica was dead, her corpse was placed in the usual way in an open coffin in a room hung with black and lighted with numerous wax candles. A company of the king's guard did duty in the anteroom. One afternoon, the carriage of Countess Steenbock, first lady of the palace and a particular favorite of the queen's, drove up from Stockholm. The officers commanding the guard of honor went to meet the countess and conducted her. from the carriage to the door of the room where the dead queen lay, which she closed after her. The long stay of the lady in the death chamber caused some uneasiness, but it was ascribed to the vehemence of her grief, and the officers on duty, fearful of disturbing the further effusions of it by their presence, left her alone with the corpse. At length, finding that she did not return, they began to apprehend that some accident had befallen her, and the captain of the guard opened the door. He instantly started back with a face of utmost dismay. The other officers ran up and plainly perceived, through the half-open door, the deceased queen standing upright in her coffin and ardently embracing the countess. The apparition seemed to move, and soon after became enveloped in a dense smoke or vapor. When this had cleared away, the body of the queen lay in the same position as before, but the countess was nowhere to be found. In vain did they search that and the adjoining apartments, while some of the party hastened to the door, thinking she must have passed unobserved to her carriage. But neither carriage, horses, driver, or footman were to be seen. A messenger was quickly dispatched with a statement of this extraordinary circumstances to Stockholm, and there he learned that the Countess Steinbach had never quitted the capital, and she had died the very moment when she was seen in the arms of the deceased queen.
Remnants from the Journal of Zahir, Hajjar by JamesMarieParkerIII. And the Americans were foolish enough to look for the lost city of Namanthoptra, that once great kingdom of decadence and splendor, where even ancient magic had supposedly been practiced among the common people before Egypt even existed. Even those who believed in Atlantis and Mu don't believe in Namanthoptra exists. Neither did I, but their money was good, so I just looked, and I saw on the altar all manner of bugs and crawling things, each one sitting on a throne of silver. I could feel them watching us, judging our worth. Terrible. Then we saw those worm-ridden priests make more symbols with their raised hands. We weren't sure what would happen next, our false belief in the non-existence of magic having been shattered. We saw dirt swirl around these small cockroach idols, slowly at first, but soon whipping faster and faster around them, even though there was not even the slightest breeze that accounted for it. Nevertheless, even though I could barely see through the miniature sandstone that the priests had created, for a moment I thought I saw the antennae, one of those golden idols, twitch slightly. In my ignorance, I had just assumed it was a trick of light. But when I saw Jimmy laying himself along the ley lines, spiders still crawling out of his mouth. They were trailing their silk behind them as they exited, crawling in single file alongside the carved runes etched into the earthen floor, and I saw Jimmy smile at me. Not that boyish smile I remember from our travels together, but a far more sinister grin. In our mad dash up the broken steps, we could hear the thousands of beetles wearing Samantha's skin calling out to us, wailing about the destruction of Gan, about the hyena and the judgment of Jan Reed on those daring to
think themselves above the gods, and even then these idols will not leave us. But we dared not leave them there, and nobody had the courage left in them to go back to Namathoptra. We spent all night discussing what we would do. William suggested that we... And already I can feel them crawling inside me. I can hear them asking for their father to let them out. They offer me magic even the worm-ridden priest could not hope for. The wealth of the kingdom still lying beneath the sands. All these things to me if I become their god. I can see my skin shift as they burrow just underneath it. I can only hold them back for so long, and already I can feel my will draining away, but I cannot let them escape. Even with all they tempt me with, I know what will happen if I do. I know I should throw myself into the fire. I need to. I hope I have the strength to do what is right, but I just beg you, do not look for Namathoptra. Do not bring anything from that cursed kingdom back to the land. Recovered and translated fragments of Zahir Hajjar's journal, currently being studied at the Museum of Egyptian Antiquities. The Black by Meltingaphabet. I've never liked hospitals. They feel dirty. All the supposedly white surfaces permanently stained a dull brownish yellow from age, bodily fluids, illness, and death. Yesterday I decided to clean out my attic. I had the unfortunate destiny of being a pack rat, like my dad, and a minimalist neat freak, like my mom. This dynamic of their vastly different lifestyles would converge like water and oil, never mixing, but instead bumping up against each other, frustrated with the inevitable resistance from the other side. They would fight while I turn up the small television in the living room in an attempt to drown them out. However, when those opposing forces exist within the same person, there is no way to release that friction. After hours or days, my parents would come up with a compromise. My dad would promise to get rid of some stuff, and my mom would buy a new bookcase or other organizational system to try and sort his mess and make the house more livable for everyone. I, however, have a mental breakdown that involves throwing everything I own onto the floor and then reshelving each item in what my delusional mind convinces me is a better organizational system. My love of stuff and my hate of clutter try to live at peace with compromises for no one. Some days I'll wake up and feel as if I'm going to suffocate under all my shit. Some days I wake up and relish the full and interesting life around me, how each item and book tells another story, completely unique to myself. Cleaning out the attic has always been my least favorite household chore. I take spring cleaning very seriously, and so it needed to be done. Yet the attic is my stuff's safe space, a place where odds and ends that don't fit neatly on my shelves can still have a home. Yet walking up into that cluttered, dusty, filled to the brim space always makes my heart feel heavy and claustrophobic. I took a deep breath and exhaled, reminding myself that once I started working, I'd get in the zone and feel better. An hour later, I groaned against the strain of lifting a heavy box of books and moving it to my large tower of must-keep boxes. You never throw out books. The box dropped with a heavy plop, and I heard a small thud behind it, something muffled in comparison. I craned my neck, and I looked behind my tower of boxes and saw a white, worn book, face down on the dusty floor. I recognized the tear on the top right corner of the now more off-white than white cover, and the large crease at the bottom. It was my cherished copy of J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zoe. Using all of my upper arm strength, which isn't much, I pushed the tower, allowing me access to the dropped artifact from my youth. My hand reached for the book, and I stopped, hovering just inches from its cover. At the side of the attic, where the roof met the floor at a sharp angle, was a large, black mass. I stayed there, hand extended towards one of my most prized possessions, mouth agape. The black, whatever it was inherently disturbing. It didn't look like mold, at least not any I knew of. Instead of spreading out like mold or fungus, this blackness was very much clumped together. It was as if it was simultaneously one organism and made up of hundreds of individual pieces. The closest thing I can compare it to is used coffee grounds. It looked dry, but also wet, and it looked like it was moving. I shuddered and grabbed the book, holding it to my chest protectively. The black looked almost like a swarm of ants, but it also didn't. It seemed to have the illusion of moving without actually moving. The black mass had a foul presence, like something I shouldn't touch. I bent over to get a better look, letting my face hover above it as close as I felt comfortable. No matter how I looked at it, the black mass looked the same. Like wet, but also dry, moving but not. I crinkled my nose and began to back away, wondering how on earth I would clean it up, when I heard a sucking noise. Not quite like a vacuum, more like someone slurping the last remnants of liquid through a straw. I looked around to try and find the source before realizing that it was coming from the black mass. And it wasn't just making a sound now. I could feel suction, dragging me closer and closer to the blackness. I tried to pull away, but the force was too strong. I cried out, attempting to throw myself backwards, but my face and body were drawn down. I screamed as it grew to encompass my entire vision. Soon everything was black and grainy and damp. My face was being drawn forward until it was mere inches from the black. I tried to scream, but the sucking drowned out any other noise. Then, total darkness. The blackness filled my mouth and my lungs, yet did not suffocate me. I tried to blink, but I could no longer tell when my eyes were closed and when they were open. My existence felt heavy and thick, like I was wrapped in blankets that were being absorbed into my very being. And then it stopped. Stunned, I blinked at the blinding light above me. I was standing in the waiting room of a hospital. It looked vaguely familiar, which I brushed off, assuming it just looked like any other hospital, when my heart stopped. "What room is Heather Mitchell in?" It was unmistakably the voice of my mother. I turned towards the nurse's station and saw, to my horror and amazement, that it was, in fact, my mom. The woman who had birthed and raised me. The woman who died 2 years ago from cancer. Yet she didn't look like the woman whose hand I held day and night in that hospital, her gray frizzy hair barely contained in the elastic at the back of her neck. Her ice blue eyes faded with illness and exhaustion. She looked upset, but a healthy upset, not like that long year through chemotherapy. I stared at her, tears welling up in my eyes. I went to take a step towards her when I saw the young girl standing at her side, the top of her head barely reaching my mom's ribcage. It was me. It was me when I was a preteen. My face stained white with tears, my cheeks still damp. I realized why the hospital looked so familiar. It wasn't because it looked like every other hospital. This was the hospital my grandmother died in when I was 12, 24 years ago. I remembered this day, the day my grandmother finally passed away. I watched my mother and I walk into room 802, hearts heavy with the knowledge of the inevitable. I stared at the door, dumbstruck. How could this be? How could I be here? Like a flash, the memories came back to me. I remembered walking into her room, the bodily smell of age mixed with Lysol, shit, and bleach, assaulting my nostrils. My grandmother lying on the bed, her eyes open a sliver, her gray pupils staring up at the ceiling, unaware of the two people crying by her bedside. I looked down at Franny and Zoe in my hands. The novella was given to me on this day by a stranger. The stories that had gotten me through the death of my grandmother, the struggles of being a teenager, the harsh truths and realizations of suddenly finding myself as an adult, and finally, the death of my own mother. The book I had received as a gift from an angel. My gaze rose back to the door, and I watched my mother leave the room, tears flowing freely from her eyes. I remember this. Mom left the hospital room to call Uncle Ron. That was when the angel came in. An angel, I suddenly realized, that looked a lot like 36-year-old me. Filled with the knowledge of what I had to do, I walked towards the room. The nurses ignored me as I passed their long, circular desk, busy with their own tasks. I held back tears as I passed my mom, now speaking in hushed tones to my uncle, her voice thick with sorrow. I stepped into the room. I couldn't help but stare at my grandmother, the woman who taught me how to bake, how to stand my ground, and how to write. I felt eyes staring at me, and turned to the younger version of myself. Her eyes were rimmed with the thin, saturated red of pain and loss. I knelt down so that we were eye to eye. "Hi, Mary," I said softly. Younger me wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her shirt and sniffled. I smiled sympathetically and held out the book. "Here, this helped me a lot through a situation like yours." She took it hesitantly, never taking her eyes from mine. I opened my arms wide and, despite not knowing who I was, I leaned into my embrace and I squeezed her tight. I remembered this moment. I remember feeling comfortable in this stranger's presence. That's why I thought she was an angel, because she felt like an angel. I know this is really hard right now, but it will get better, I promise. Read the book. I kissed the top of the head and pulled away. She looked down at the deeply loved cover in her hand, and I remembered how I took care of that book, as if it were precious, for 24 years, starting today. I walked out of the room, tears burning my eyes. I thanked whatever power got me there, that let me tangibly support myself. It made me feel better. It made me think about the day before, about going into another hospital, similar to this one, yellowing at the edges. My doctor's sympathetic face as she told me I had breast cancer. That without chemotherapy, I only had 6 months to live, but that it was my decision how to proceed. I thought of my young self, of Franny and Zoe, and the prayer that Franny said meditatively to set her tremulous mind at ease. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me.